I'm trying to mog the camera.
Trying to what?
Mog? So when you go like... Just look like... Look over here. I'll show you.
Yeah. Like you're looking at someone?
At myself. Look. This this is normal, right? And I got a mog.
Like yourself in a mirror?
Yeah, in like an obnoxious, narcissistic way. You trying to do a rabbinical mogging? Oh. Welcome to the platform. We're here to discuss interesting things with interesting people. Clip it, share it, repost it, make little font edits. More power to you. Today our first guest is none other than Rabbi Elkin. Without further ado. So, Rabbi, why don't you introduce yourself and explain some of your background growing up, college, academia, that kind of stuff.
Sure. So my name is Rabbi Elkin. I was born in Hackensack, New Jersey, 1978. Since then, I grew up in modern Orthodox Jewish day schools, kindergarten through the end of high school. Attended Ramapo College on a scholarship, went from there to NYU, and spent my third year of college in Switzerland. It was very
what school?
Enlightening and informative.
How so?
Formative experience. It was a very interesting time in world events because there was a big scandal that broke in Switzerland regarding the legal heirs of the money that was on deposit in Swiss banks during the war.
From who?
So the Jewish families that had money deposited in Swiss accounts, the Swiss banks refused to allow the inheritance to pass on to the demonstrably legal heirs of that money, works of art, jewelry.
What was the case for that? What was like?
Well, the case was that that's how we roll in Switzerland. The banks are run in, much more so then than now, but they were run in secrecy, which meant that they didn't care. They didn't need a name and an address or anything. You can show up to a Swiss bank up until the late 90s. You show up to a Swiss bank with a suitcase full of cash, or drugs or jewels or whatever, guns. I mean, it's whatever you have. Keep it packaged, and you could open a bank account with just an account number. That's all you had.
How would you identify yourself to know you're the owner?
They didn't care, and that was the point. You had an
like
account
card
number.
Okay.
No, your account number was everything. It was your
wow.
password.
Okay.
So no one outside of any Swiss bank would know that you're the owner of a particular account, but except for you and anyone you gave the account number to. So
what they were saying,
I had a great uncle, for argument's sake, who had $1 million on deposit, could have been gold coins, it could have been other currencies, in a Swiss bank, and this story broke in Credit Suisse, which is a Swiss-French bank. Not that the Swiss German banks were any better, but the scandal broke there. So, if I had anything in a Swiss bank deposit box or vault, anyone with access to the account number could withdraw as much as they wanted whenever they wanted. Just show up, tell them, here's the account number, here's what I'm withdrawing, or give me everything or whatever. They didn't care.
Right.
And anyone without the account number, on the other hand, couldn't take anything out, even if you had a relative who had money there, who had something on deposit, who had died or been killed. So they did observe inheritance laws to the extent that you could prove the death. So if you had a death certificate that you could present and say, well, my great uncle so-and-so passed away, here's proof, here's a death certificate from such and such hospital in whatever country. And they would, at least on their honor, hopefully, give you everything that he had on deposit there if you were the legal heir. Problem was that Auschwitz didn't print death certificates. So the Swiss banks claimed that there was no law in Switzerland that required them to pass the money on to any legal heirs without sufficient evidence of the death.
Ooh. Okay.
So they're saying, okay, but the Germans killed and cremated these people and had no interest in passing on, in printing death certificates. And that battle went on, started shortly after the war.
Right.
Or in the late 40s. I believe in the early 50s, I think there were already international petitions. I mean, people were putting pressure on the American government, the Canadian government, I believe, because the Bronfman family was there, trying to put pressure and invite more scrutiny onto what's going on in these secretive Swiss banks. New York Magazine printed a great article that I was looking for and haven't found since. I got to look at the archives or something about how Switzerland, at the turn of the 20th century, Switzerland was one of the poorest countries in Europe per capita. There was overpopulation, deforestation caused mudslides, they had malaria, they had problems that nowhere else in Europe had.
Right.
By the end of the Second World War, Switzerland is the single wealthiest country in Europe per capita.
Interesting.
There was a lot of industrial espionage there. They stole chocolate making from the Belgians. They stole clock and knife making from the Germans. Switzerland was very good at protecting themselves and their borders and their industrial interests and being secretive. They aren't part of any international treaties, so they aren't beholden to the same laws a lot of other countries are. They don't have extradition laws.
So this is what year that you got here? This is after Ramapo.
This is 1997, 1998.
Okay.
It was my third year in college. When I transferred to NYU, I decided to petition the Committee of Academic Standards for permission to take on a triple major. I wanted to do economics in the College of Arts and Sciences, French language literature, and German language literature. And I could kind of barely squeak by with a certain amount of overage credits that they would tolerate. You can't stay there forever, but I think I made it out with like 144 out of what should have been 128. They let me audit Russian. A few other classes I just didn't have. They didn't want me taking more than a certain amount.
Right.
Whatever it was.
So what languages are you fluent in or comfortable in or familiar with?
Comfortably fluent English, Hebrew, French, and German. Grew up speaking Hebrew at home with my mother and other relatives, but English, and we grew up here in the U.S., so English at school, with neighbors, friends, etc.
Any other languages that you're...
Yeah, I can read Arabic. I can read Russian, though I don't speak enough to understand terribly much of it. Yep, other linguistic pursuits that...
Spanish, right?
That's about nice. I can read Spanish, yeah, follow it.
Nice.
Spoken conversational Spanish, right? Have a business in meat packing, so I've got some experience at the slaughterhouse.
For
and
sure.
Other places where I'm able to polish up my Spanish.
Plenty of Spanish there.
But enough to get, messages across.
Okay, so this is... then what year did you graduate, and what did you do after that?
So I went back to the U.S. in 98, fall of 98, and graduated in 99 from NYU, and I went straight to Israel after I graduated, stayed there for 6 years.
Interesting. So why did you pivot from economics, finance, that kind of genre into Israel, into rabbinical studies?
That year in Switzerland was very formative for me. I had been abroad. We traveled a lot. My parents were both very interested in culture. My father grew up in France for much of his childhood. He had been to almost every country in Europe, I imagine, save for maybe Scandinavia. And I always had an interest in foreign languages and foreign cultures. My father's stepfather, I never met my biological grandfather. He passed when my father was maybe 17 or 18. But my father's stepfather was off the boat from Austria. Had a horrendous accent. And German accents weren't cool.
Yeah, that's
after the war. So he was Jewish, but it wasn't such a cool accent. So, but he himself was also of mixed descent. I think his father's side was Czech. His mother's side was Hungarian. He was born in Austria, in Achgrab, a little north of Vienna. So he spoke Czech, Hungarian, Italian, French, English, Spanish, German, real polyglot.
Right.
Played violin, played piano. Really fascinating guy. So it kind of sparked my interest in cultures and understanding languages and figuring out how to communicate with people. So what was the biggest thing that changed that you would say before and after? That year in Switzerland was the first time I'd spent a significant amount of time, more than a few months, in a country other than America or Israel. We used to go to Israel over the summers to visit my grandparents and uncles, aunts, cousins over the summers, on the summer break. That year in Switzerland was fascinating to me. Aside from what I learned, history, culture, French, German, there was a resurgence in really interesting popular anti-Semitism where The story broke. The way the story broke
Mm-hmm.
was a security guard who worked at Credit Suisse was doing his night shift,
Mm-hmm.
as he would any other day. And as he's patrolling around the bank and its premises, he comes across another security guard whom he knew, and he knew this gentleman not to have access to the room that he was in. It was an
Mm-hmm.
archive room that they're not supposed to enter. They patrol. They walk around, make sure nobody's there.
Right.
You see this guy standing over a pallet of documents and a high-capacity shredder.
Ooh.
So what's he doing? Well, I don't know. I'm going to write a report and put in my report a complaint that there was a security guard who had access to something he shouldn't have had access to and looked like he was shredding official documents that the
Right.
bank ought to know about. He reports this to his superior. He says, listen, you're going to have to investigate that. There's something really shady going on with this guy having access to the place. They said, thank you, sir, for your service, but your service is no longer required here. You're fired. So this guy's, obviously taken aback. So wait a second. I saw something shady, quite probably illegal.
Right.
The bank is hiding. I report it and I get fired?
Right.
We'll see about that.
Uh-huh.
So he goes to the press. He says, hey, I don't know what's going on in Credit Suisse, but there's security guards shredding documents over there.
Huh.
You might want to look into this.
Right.
And lo and behold, I believe it was Edgar Brunfeld at the time was the head of the World Jewish Congress. And it just rekindled this entire discussion that had basically died on the vine,
Mm-hmm.
where the Swiss kept on stonewalling all the people demanding repayment of the inheritance money from all these victims of the Holocaust. By then, it was a point made in the New Yorker article, which is what sparked, a lot of international scrutiny into Switzerland and its so-called neutrality and its
Right.
so-called secrecy. The compound interest on that money alone had probably doubled it, if you figure it about 7% every year from, it was before the war, really.
Right, the 40s.
So 37, 38,
37.
39, up until you're talking the 90s, this is almost 60 years later.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases more, in some cases
Right.
maybe just a little bit less. What might have been estimated at about $40 billion then was probably about $80 billion. And then you'd hear things that had some really interesting... so it was all TV. They didn't have much internet back then. You had email, maybe we had, but it was back in the stone age of digital and the information superhighway.
Mm-hmm.
They had this TV program. I forget what it was called. It was like 60 minutes kind of wrap up of the news of whatever had come across their desk that week. They do these street interviews with people just out on the streets. I remember a couple of these where there was an older gentleman standing outside the Grand Synagogue of Geneva, the main synagogue of Geneva. They had set up a bunch of concrete blockades, the portable type, because there was apparently some credible threat to the community. Someone might try to park a car or a truck bomb outside of the synagogue. And they're interviewing this guy, and they're asking questions like, is it true what they say in the press, or what the world opinion is, that we, the Swiss, are actually anti-Semitic? And the guy's like, anti-Semitic? How could you not be? This is how they operate. He points to the synagogue. He's like, first they want a synagogue, then they want a parking lot. He's like, now they want the whole street. And you're looking at a guy standing in front of a place that has threats, against their safety and well-being. Curious things like that made you wonder.
Right.
These people obviously
Small
harbored a lot of
offhand
these
comments,
sentiments that were going around before the war too. And Switzerland is a little bit sometimes backwards that way, where things don't move terribly quickly across the country or inside it. They had another woman who was talking about it, and she's like, yeah, I don't think I'm anti-Semitic at all, but every time I hear the Jews, it's always money, money, money. You're like, wait a second, lady, whose money are you sitting on? Who built your country? This is blood money that you're collecting interest on, lending it out at interest, fractional reserve banking. You're multiplying this at whose expense? Whose graves are you tap dancing on? That
Switzerland.
Your country all of a sudden became so wealthy and so pampered. Obviously, people either didn't care or just weren't aware, or a combination of the two.
So you spent.
So then you had another, people just talking about this left and right, saying, yeah, but it was the war. It was a long time ago. It wasn't us. It was someone else. Okay, it wasn't it. Just give the money back. That's all. That's how inheritances work.
Right.
There's a thing. It's called inheritance. Someone you're related to dies, has no other closer heir than you. You get the money. That's all.
So you spent this time in Switzerland, and then you came back to America. And then what happened after? What was...
If I remember correctly, I came back for my older brother's wedding. And it was a nice wedding. religious, traditional ceremony, very lively, lots of joy to it. It was an interesting break from the year in Switzerland where,
Right.
Here you're in this really weird, at least verbally hostile situation going on around you. It was very strange.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very strange. People there was at the university. One of the professors told me that people were handing out, disseminating some anti-Semitic brochures and stuff. This is just Walter Haas. I remember his name. So he was a professor of dialects. Really, really fascinating class that he taught. I have his book. Anyway, went back for the wedding. Came back to Switzerland. I'm saying to myself, what on earth am I doing here? Why are these people hostile? As if we did anything wrong? I mean, and you're upset about the fact that we called your attention to something we've been telling you for the past 50 something years, which is, this really is not your money. There were some lovely people and perfectly friendly and understanding of the whole situation.
Of course,
not everybody in Switzerland is a banker, and it's not like they there's no referenda. They don't vote on this.
Right.
Some very shady institutions doing some very shady things, but it's definitely not the majority of people there. But it was interesting. It piqued my curiosity in the sense that I grew up in the U.S. You have people like Whoopi Goldberg pretending to be Jewish just to sort of help their careers
Goldberg,
along.
yeah.
No, she adopted the name. I was telling her something like, if you want to succeed, you got to take Jewish name. And in Europe, obviously, there's certain parts of it, things are very different. So I decided I wanted to do a little more than just be a businessman, use the economics for that. For me, economics is more a way of understanding the world, understanding world events, people's motivations for things at the personal, community, corporate, industrial, national, international levels.
Are there any particular economic influences that you had? Particular ideas, authors?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time reading about it, discussing with people, even career economists I've had the fortune of interacting with from time to time. I took a break from it when I moved to Israel. This is in 1999, the summer of '99. Spent 6 years in Mitzpeh Yericho, a lovely yeshiva. Some very fascinating rabbanim. Touch on that at some point. But the economic influences, I would say, very much like the many of the religious influences, are very. The principal influences and influencers are those that are most liberty oriented, and that's probably a really, a binding theme between the two aspects of life: the religious, the spiritual, and the material. That freedom really is everything. It's not just a thing or another thing. It really is the point.
You're saying especially economically?
Across the board. Okay. Spiritually too. Spiritual freedom. Judaism is a religion we do not convert by force. We don't convert by the sword. We don't go on military campaigns. It's literally, in the most literal sense, an exercise in futility. You can't force someone to adopt a faith. Faith is something you adopt. It's a creed. It's a belief. It's a way of life. On the contrary, we even somewhat politely discourage candidates from taking it on. It's a lot. Judaism's a lot. There's no question. There's a lot of obligations, a lot of expectations. And you accept them and you adopt them voluntarily. And if not, then not. The large majority of the Jewish population in the world today is not specifically observant or religious. We identify nationally, ethnically, but not necessarily spiritually or religiously. They may not identify as anything else. I mean, they would tell you, sure, that's the religion that I'm born into or that I feel close to, but not necessarily at the level of daily observance.
Right.
It was the libertarian-leaning economists that left the strongest impressions on me. Before libertarianism as a movement came about, or let's say the term was coined, these are referred to as classical liberals, in the sense of, laissez-faire, laissez-passer, like let people do and let things pass, let people go.
Laissez-faire, I think.
Laissez-faire, right? Laissez-faire, let people do.
That's how it translates in French. Okay.
Let people do, and laissez-passer is like let them go. Let people go. Let them do what they do. So let them pass. So I grew up in a very conservative household.
Mm-hmm.
Both my parents they're political, let's see, even academic orientation. Child rearing, so very much disciplined, conservative. What you would orient more towards conservative than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely politically too. And the idea that freedom reigns supreme took me some time to get used to. It was really, my parents have a great respect for the police, for military, for educators, people in positions of
authority.
You could say, yeah, people in positions of authority. My father would never fight with or argue with a police officer, even if he got pulled over.
Right.
He had been audited by the IRS once or twice. He had a business, and he sold it. Very cordial, very friendly. This is your job. You do what you got to do. And that's pretty much it. Questioning authority was not something that I was raised on. Cynicism and skepticism of government, yes.
Okay.
That very much so. He had very little respect for government bureaucracy or useless wastes of time, certainly for excessive taxation in his eyes. And it took a lot of questioning. A lot of layers had to be peeled back before I really got to the heart of it. Like there were talking about Hobbes and Locke, Adam Smith, right? I mean, the very idea that people own property, that it's theirs, starting to ask questions about what form of government or what form of governance. I don't think they could question that there was a monarchy and that they weren't really going to call for a revolution, certainly not in writing. But what is the best way for a king or for his advisors to facilitate commerce or to maximize wealth? Or you tell you, this is the wealth of nations. Smith wrote a really seminal book on the topic. The idea, by and large, that the more you leave people alone, the more the market will figure itself out. And people will rise to the occasion. They will negotiate wages, they'll negotiate prices, they'll negotiate the goods and services they're willing to buy and prioritize. They'll negotiate their ways around shortages and surpluses, around price spikes. They'll find alternatives. They'll use different building materials. They'll use different textiles. They'll eat different fish, meat, poultry, whatever they need to do in order to survive. And it just helps to redistribute these pressures that end up on one good or service or another. Price of chicken goes up, maybe the price of pork is a little bit lower. If the price of beef is high, the price of goat and lamb might be, comparable.
So, what would you say to? There's a lot of people who have this common critique of free market capitalism, that it leads to inherent wealth inequality and exploitation by people who end up getting more resources than others.
Right. There probably is no true free market anywhere.
Okay. You're saying it's impossible.
What I mean by that is that you have a government, you already don't have a free market. The thought of completely freeing markets strikes fear in the hearts of people the world over. Ron Paul has a great line about that where he discussed it. He's dedicated his life to liberty. And he really deserves a nod because it's a thankless task in a lot of ways, but he's just passing on the torch of what he absorbed from his influencers, Ayn Rand being up at the top of the list, Ludwig von Mises for sure. Some very famous and notable Jewish names in libertarianism. The two of them were
not
tremendous.
very well known, I think. Ayn Rand and von Mises.
Tragically not. Ayn Rand fled the Bolshevik Revolution and sought liberty, freedom of expression here in America. But she was Jewish on all sides, raised Jewish. Not specifically observant, but that was already after the Bolshevik Revolution. It was a tumultuous time for religions of all kinds anyway. Ludwig von Mises literally fled the Nazis.
Right.
He grew up in Austria. He was as classically Austrian economist as it gets. And aside from being an absolutely brilliant economist, he made very eloquent, very well-defended arguments in favor of freedom and against government intervention of any kind. That it will always cost you more than it's worth. It's always an inefficiency. It's always going to bog the system down, slow down commerce. It'll never solve the problem of black markets and of criminal activity, criminal activity as defined by whom. Why certain substances are controlled and others aren't. It doesn't matter if it's drugs or services. What the government decides to prohibit or encourage. Always a great question in terms of the morality that the government believes it can or should be promoting, or the immorality they believe they should be discouraging. sin taxes on alcohol, tobacco, etc.
Right.
And von Mises, Ludwig von Mises was so he was born in Mises. He was knighted by
Really?
the Austrian government.
Huh, I didn't know
the
that.
Von just means of in German, and normally that's a particle, like de or de or du in French,
Sure.
or in other languages. So VAN,
Mm-hmm.
like Vanson in Dutch. It was just something that they did traditionally. They would give someone a certain region that they could collect taxes on, or you'd make you a duke or a count.
Mm-hmm.
So you have duchies or counties, and you were the one allowed to take a certain percentage of taxes on their agricultural output, on their livestock, on just money. Once coinage and paper money became a thing, so he didn't. He wasn't a duke or a count at that point. There wasn't any more of that left. But they officially knighted him. He was so brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
And was such a source of pride to Austria, to the Austrian School of Economics, which is probably the most heavily libertarian school of thought in the world of economics. And he fled the Nazis, but he got out. I mean, he's a famous man. It wasn't like he would be terribly hard to find. Him and Freud, Sigmund Freud, who also was Jewish and also had to flee the persecution. They let him out. As a matter of fact, in Freud's case, famously, because he was a character, he had a great sense of humor. He may well have missed his calling as a comedic writer. Yeah, he was basically the German-Jewish Mark Twain of his time. He just didn't spend as much time writing about
adventures,
fiction. Yeah.
Right.
But the German border guards who signed his passport out of the country, specifically requested that he sign a note in which he proclaims that he was in no way mishandled or mistreated by the soldiers, because they would have been humiliated if he called them out by name as saying, "This soldier mistreated me." I mean, Freud was the founder of modern psychology. Say what you will about his personality and some of his theories. So, a lot of them are still cornerstones of psychology. The whole concept of conscious,
unconscious,
subconscious, ego, superego. So he didn't coin all those terms, but definitely popularized them and advanced their cause in the field of study. So Freud wrote on this note on his way out of Germany that the SS troops were delightful, and I would recommend them to anyone. So his way of saying, "You want a note? I'm being expelled, exiled from my country, and you're asking me to write you like a letter of commendation." Well, right. Okay. So give him a back.
Actually, that's an interesting topic to pivot into. To what extent do you think his concept of conscious, subconscious, id, ego, superego, to what extent does that align with the Jewish perspective of the psyche and how consciousness operates?
I'm always going to give a nod to someone who just nudged the ball along. The very fact that he thought to think in these terms, that he thought to express these things, to explore them, to look into them, on the whole, there's no harm done by looking into things, investigating, analyzing, etc. It comes back to freedom. Let people explore. He wrote some fascinating things on the interpretations of dreams, subconscious fantasies and frustrations, dreams representing the fulfillment or the constant dangling of this carrot on a stick of something you're trying to achieve but can't. Feelings of guilt, the pursuit, being pursued by things that you feel like you should have done or could have done differently or better or worse. Anxiety, angst is the German word for it, right? This concept of things that so fundamentally perturb you and frustrate you that they shape your personality and the things that you're drawn to or that you recoil from. Right. Maybe what professions you look into, what type of relationship you're interested in, or why your relationships fail. Maybe it's because of these recurring themes in your history, your personal history, your personality, things that you're still struggling with. People struggling with demons. People struggling with addiction. Addiction as a coping mechanism, this idea of self-medication. He himself was addicted to cocaine, and fascinatingly enough, he wrote about it. He wrote that he knew he was addicted and he had to get himself off it, and he did. And he describes the process.
Withdrawal.
Cocaine just made people feel good. They didn't know
at the time
it was habit forming.
Right.
It certainly seems like a lot of people felt like it solved a lot of their problems, but it definitely created bigger ones. They tinkered with a lot back then. It's interesting to note. Cocaine, you're talking about now the turn of the 20th century,
Mm-hmm.
because the coca plant itself is native to northern South America.
Mm-hmm.
Heroin was marketed by the Bayer drug company. Bayer in German just means a Bavarian. Bayern in German
Interesting.
is Bavaria.
Yeah, I remember they have memes out
BMW,
there.
the Bavarian Motor Works, right?
They have where it's like back in the day. Oh, they would just give you heroin. You have like a toothache or a headache.
I know someone whose grandfather was a pharmacist
Mm-hmm.
in New Jersey, and he still has a case of vials of heroin. It was marketed as heroin. That was the name of the product.
Wow.
It was just the original super concentrated opiate. I don't even think today. I mean, I don't think there's anything stronger than heroin.
Fentanyl?
Percocet. I mean, fentanyl. Yeah, but that's heroin is a depressant.
Right. Okay.
It depresses your nervous system. It slows down your reactions.
Mm-hmm.
It numbs pain.
Mm-hmm.
It causes all kinds of pain after you get off it. But
Mm-hmm.
heroin later, morphine was found to be
Right.
just about as habit forming, but they thought it was a milder form of it. So they were experimenting a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and that has to do a lot with arms races, really. Countries were
Interesting.
fascinated at the time in World War
Right.
One.
Well, the Nazi troops were using amphetamines.
Yeah, that was Hitler.
Yeah. In
you
Vietnam, they were using also heroin, marijuana, I think, too.
A sense of euphoria. It helped some. It's interesting because some people respond to it more with paranoia and anxiety,
Right.
but apparently it helped people overcome some of their natural inhibitions, just running into suicide
Mhm.
missions. Some of the
Right.
Vietcong were known for that. It was very, very interesting how, and it all comes together. I mean, it makes sense. The world was expanding its horizons and experimenting on every imaginable front.
Mm-hmm.
This is with the discovery of, the steam engine, and
Mhm.
later the combustion engine.
Mhm.
It's a Ford, the Model T, and the airplane, the Wright
Mhm.
brothers. So
This is just another front. for-
chemically, pharmacologically,
Right.
they were trying to experiment with it. There were maybe substances, performance-enhancing drugs.
Right. Makes sense.
Antibiotics.
Mm-hmm.
The world discovered the early forms of penicillin.
Mhm.
You're talking right around the if I remember correctly, it's the early half of the 20th century. I don't know that they had penicillin by World War One. Worth looking into for sure. By World War Two,
yeah,
World War One,
yeah.
I believe they might have had a precursor to it or penicillin
Mhm.
itself. But the idea that, well, obviously there's commercial medical applications for it.
Mm-hmm.
But then it always comes down to the military-industrial complex
Yeah.
too, right?
Ha.
If we can save more of our soldiers, they'll
Mhm.
have better morale. They'll know the chances of death from
Right.
infection, from gunshot or shrapnel wounds is lower. If we can give them a little boost in terms of their heroism,
Right. Right.
Heroin. I guess it makes you feel a little invincible if you don't feel pain. I mean, there's more things you can.
Well, there's
do.
definitely a fine balance between being confident versus just schlumping on the battlefield.
Cocaine, amphetamines, get them all on speed. You'll get them, active and working. Maybe it'll help them push through a difficult.
I wonder, do you know if they're
military front.
if they're actively using this stuff on the
can't-
battlefield today?
I have no
I don't
idea.
think they probably wouldn't be open about it. No.
First of all, no, you wouldn't get a straight answer from anybody. Second of all,
Right.
maybe under extreme circumstances or maybe certain particular special ops type groups, if they have to be awake for a really long time,
Yeah,
I imagine
yeah,
they
yeah.
have their
Right.
go-tos. The problem, though, and this is not unique to the chemicals and pharmacology, but the problem is that, in this case, chemical intervention, just like intervention by a government in its economy, is just going to create inefficiencies.
Mm.
You can't create energy. You can't create matter. You can just change forms. Amphetamines don't give you energy.
Mm-hmm.
They will definitely boost your heart rate, get your metabolism working, and help you consume, combust the energy that you already have.
Right.
There's a crash
Right.
that's going to follow.
Mm-hmm.
And the ensuing crash is going to make you pay with interest
Mm-hmm.
for all of the energy that you borrowed from your future self.
Right.
So even on the battlefield, to get through a particular battle,
Mm-hmm.
to get through a particular sticking point, you need to make it to a rendezvous, etc. You might need those things, and they may save a life in the very, very short term.
Mm-hmm.
But the crash that follows makes you pretty useless.
Mhm.
Imagine putting soldiers on meth.
Oh,
They might
they
stay
definitely
awake for a week.
at some point.
I
Well,
have
for
no doubt they've
for a
experimented with these
blitz,
things.
for a blitz type of
Okay, but then
strategy,
if
I
you're
feel
awake for a week straight, I mean, at some point,
no, you're gonna have
your
well, you'd have to
memory's gonna
cycle
go,
them out,
your
right?
cognition's going to go, your coordination's going to go.
Yeah,
You'll end
yeah.
up being a liability. You can kill
Right.
somebody by accident. You'll start getting tweaks and jitters. And
A bunch of tweakers in the trenches.
I mean, again, I don't doubt that they've tinkered with this stuff.
For sure.
The U.S., every military, the Russians and the Germans
Yeah,
too,
I can see that.
probably tinkered with all this stuff. People are always looking for crutches, for boosters, for shortcuts, and the same is true economically, right? If only we could jumpstart an economy by printing a bunch of money and letting
Cutting interest rates
Yeah.
to zero and
cutting interest rates to zero, forgiving loans.
Right.
None of these things make any economic sense. You just can't create wealth out of nowhere. Referring back to your earlier question about, is it the free market that creates imbalances or bizarre distribution of wealth? No, that's life and reality that do that. And the argument has been made time and time again, and I definitely subscribe to it. If you were to give every human being $1 million today, first of all, the money would be worthless.
right.
Secondly, even if you did, you know that the stats would start to change
Immediately.
the next minute.
Right. Yeah.
Where would the money go? I don't know. Drugs, gambling, food,
Traveling, vacations,
traveling,
houses, cars.
pornography. Go figure.
Everywhere,
People would just
right.
feed their vices, alcohol. So no matter how much money you gave people, whether it's a lot or a little, some would save, some would spend, some would invest, some would take more risks, some would take less, some would, try to help people in need and be more charitable about it. Some definitely wouldn't. These ideas, I was just listening to Javier Milei's speech at the Davos World
I want to
Economic
hear your
Forum.
thoughts on him too, by the way. Yeah.
Brilliant man. Absolutely brilliant man. I salute him. What I've read and seen and heard so far is it is mind-blowing how far liberty has come, that a country that was so fundamentally socialist as Argentina, that had gone through two
Decades.
currency meltdowns.
Right.
They just printed themselves into oblivion. They couldn't do
Right.
it. Country that was hiding stats like credit card debt. They just couldn't confront reality. Just like a drug addict. Just like a drug, not kind of like, exactly like a drug addict.
Yeah.
Just medicating themselves with more printed money and
Right.
chasing the dragon and trying to, reproduce their economic successes of yesteryear. So to take a country like Argentina that had been in the real murky depths of socialism, and their economy was just disintegrating and falling apart, maybe they artificially don't look as horrible as they should, only because the rest of the world is still playing the same game of hot potato.
Right.
They're all printing money. They're all devaluing their currency. They're all suffering from inflation. They have to raise the interest rates or the inflation gets completely out of control like it did in Venezuela.
Or Germany, Weimar Republic.
Well, that's
Hyper.
one of the fundamental causes of the war.
Right.
Printing
We'll
money.
get
to
into
try to
that
keep up
later,
with the
yeah.
debt.
But on Argentina.
But to hear, that a country like Argentina that was so, I mean, this is entrenched already. You're talking about socialism probably from the 60s and on.
Wow.
This is in the education system. It's in popular culture. This is already 3, maybe 4 generations of it. To overturn that, and for him to be popularly voted into office, freely elected, as Klaus Schwab said, freely elected. Yes, he was freely elected. It's a beacon of hope.
Right.
And what's Milei's goal? The old joke that these anarcho-libertarians are secretly plotting to take over the world and just leave everyone alone.
That's his pitch, yeah.
Yeah. I will take control of the government and just leave you alone.
Right. Cut the spending.
Half of it ends up in the shredder, the other half in the dumpster. We have no use for the overwhelming majority of this. It's not that these aren't important functions that society shouldn't carry out. Sure, you need security. You need some degree of environmental, protections. The market will provide. If not the market, then the federal government is the last place you go for it. Let the provincial governments compete. Come here, we have clean water. We have a nicer shoreline. Come here, we have affordable housing. Come here, we have pro-business tax codes and attitudes. Come here because the laws are very relaxed. Come here because we let you do whatever you want on your property. Come here because you can't have more than a certain number of cattle or swine on your property. Because
So what do you think? What do you see in Argentina's future if these ideas are executed properly?
I mean, not just Argentina, but the world. First of all, I suppose that over the course of the coming months and years,
Mm-hmm.
and not a lot of them, you're going to see a lot of investment in Argentina.
Mm-hmm.
People love freedom.
Right. It's true.
Everyone loves freedom, except for the people whose business it is to take it away from you and try to sell it back to you piecemeal. And we refer to them as government. The idea that freedom now has a home, that there's a country that's really signed on.
Right.
So Ron Paul, I mentioned him earlier. I mean, I don't know if I got to the quote. His quote was that people love to blame the free market. We're talking about free market and wealth inequality. People love to point at the free market. The free market's broken. It's antiquated. It's this, that. It's inhumane. Freedom is in its diapers.
If you look at
Look
it right.
at human
Yeah,
history. Look at the number of, we're talking millennia,
Yeah.
that people were dominated,
Right.
oppressed, repressed, suppressed, and depressed by monarchs, by theocracies, by all sorts of insane, absolutely insane,
medieval,
and abusive.
Yeah, we call it medieval. For a
I mean, the
reason,
medieval
yeah.
times were an advancement over primitive, probably even
Yeah.
worse back in the day. The amount, just the sheer billions of people
Yeah.
who lived under the thumb of cruel dictators, cruel theocrats, people who were subject to organized religions of different kinds, that where people were forcibly excommunicated, had their belongings or their property confiscated at will. The idea that freedom as a form of government, minimal government as a form of government, probably started here in the U.S. In the Federalist Papers, the negotiations and debates that took place, ferocious debates, by the way, really worth looking into if anybody's interested in that, over what is the best system of government to set up when America, like a bat out of hell, was trying to get away from monarchy, dictatorship, autocrats, theocrats. They didn't want any of it. Further appreciable the fact that you're talking about people who, even Protestantism was relatively young at the time. So Martin Luther, most of England goes along with the Protestant reform, and they come to the conclusion that the Catholic Church is an institution. They felt like in almost all the countries basically every country that adopted Protestantism to a greater or lesser extent, felt like the Catholic Church had too much influence outside of religion.
Interesting.
So you're a religious institution, but why does that have anything to do with who the next king is going to be? Or whether or not the country permits this or forbids that? Who's going to war over what and why? And so they founded the country. They weren't atheists. They were most probably,
the founding
fathers of America,
right, okay.
weren't atheists. They were probably best described as deists for the most part. How religious they were, even within, let's say, the confines of Protestant Christianity, excellent questions for sure, worth looking into. But that was another aspect of freedom. They wanted freedom from institutionalized religion, freedom from theocrats, freedom from monarchs, freedom from any form of restriction, restraint, oppression. And you have your Bill of Rights: freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of religion, the freedom not to be religious at all if you choose to.
Right.
Up until then, in human history, it was pretty much expected. There was a national religion, you followed it, or you had sectarian violence. One tribe is stronger, one is less. One religion is more popular, one's less. People have been fighting over religion for thousands of years. And here you have a country that says, look, people who believe in God, people who believed that the world was created, right? Who believe these rights to be God-given. I mean, it was that said. They did believe in God, they reference. But they believe that you should have the right to choose whether or not you want to believe in anything, how you want to practice, how you want to believe. You just can't violate anybody else's rights. So to Ron Paul's point, libertarianism is all of what? 200, not even 250 years old.
Yeah. So wait, you
the theories go back, and people, but this is the ultimate redemption of humanity from the misery that humanity foists upon itself or upon each other,
right,
with these horrible, corrupt, overbearing, overarching institutions that just want to control everything you do, say, can say, where you can't work, can't live, what types of commerce you can engage in. Here you have a country that was founded revolutionarily. It was a rebellion, a revolution against Britain, against the monarchy, against whatever religious institution the idea that freedom needs to be given a shot. It needs to be given a chance. And for all the people who speak ill of it, and the people who cower from this concept, oh God, wait, let people free, look what's going to happen. Well, look what people do to each other when they have the power and they have the force, the authority to corrupt. Minimize the government, and there is no corruption. There's less of it. I mean, there's human corruption, but that's at the individual level. You don't like a corporation, don't buy their stuff. You don't like your neighbor, don't deal with him. Don't talk to him. Don't buy anything. Don't employ him. Don't work for him. You're free to make these choices. Let's see how society does. And it was revolutionary. These were all immigrants. They were all poor. Many of them fleeing religious persecution, financial persecution at the hands of the king. And it was an experiment. And the experiment gave birth to the wealthiest and most productive economy in human history.
Yeah.
Not without its flaws. Definitely, we could talk about international politics and meddling and the empire that America is, and the many wars that America had historically been involved in, which was very much. They would shudder at the thought the founding fathers of America was involved in foreign wars.
Yeah.
At all. But to Ron Paul's point, freedom is in its infancy. Give it a chance. Don't be so quick to blame everything on freedom. At the same time, remember how much evil is promulgated and perpetuated by any other form of government you can imagine, religious or not, democratic or not. It's inherent to the system, and people are so used to it that that's what you get. It is what it is, a part of life. It's just a feature of the landscape. Freedom is in its diapers. It needs to be encouraged. It needs to be promoted. It needs to be relied upon. It needs to be allowed to rise to the challenge. So Javier Milei is an amazing development in world politics, in world history.
He might be the first libertarian ruler since the founding fathers. You can make the case very strongly.
As much of a contradiction in terms as libertarian ruler.
Yeah.
But that's the system. Instead of burning it down, instead of taking up arms, he's using the government and the authority and the power that he was given to minimize the government and the authority and power that he was given. That's about as brilliant as it gets.
So let's work with that point for a second and say to other countries around the world or in the region that are looking at this, why, if you had to make the case to them, why should you adopt this model when what they're seeing is we have to cut all these programs, we're going to have to cut all these benefits, the government is going to lose a lot of its ability to manipulate the economy by, because they see it as a good thing, right? Jobs creation, you're giving more money, more loans. Why should they give any of that up, and how is any of that better for?
Well, start with the reality. The government doesn't create anything.
Right.
All it does is consume.
Just to add one thing, a better question would be, why should people be interested in this? Because they're the ones that are ultimately supposedly voting and deciding and electing. So why should they vote for less welfare, less programs?
To compound the question, it's specifically people who stand to benefit, quote unquote, at least in theory, from welfare programs, from government benefits, from entitlement programs. Why should they consider the alternative? Well, I could give you a bunch of different analogies. Think about someone who works at a sedentary 9-to-5 desk job. They have poor posture. They're wearing shoes that don't have a wide toe box. So their foot posture is off. Their ankles, their knees, their hips. I mean, arthritis. If it existed, it wasn't something everybody experienced back in the day. You sit in chairs all day, so your back slouches, your shoulders roll forward because you're always reaching for a keyboard. And these are all adaptations that your body will make. In order to help facilitate the work and that you're demanding it do. A lot of these people have physical pain. A lot of them take anti-anxiety medications, and they go to therapists, and they're constantly looking for painkillers and reaching for things that'll just make their lives more convenient. Then imagine, if you will, a reality in which you stop taking pain meds. You stop going to the chiropractor. You stop going to the therapist. And you actually start solving problems at their root. My back hurts because of the way I sit, or because of the chair I sit in. Well, maybe I can spend more time standing. I can get a standing desk. Maybe I can do some of my work walking around with a headset. If it's on the phone, I can do it while I'm walking, not even jogging, but at least walking. Maybe it'd be better for my eyesight, my circadian rhythm, to get some sunshine in my eyes and
less
in my skin.
blue fluorescent lighting.
Yeah, maybe being a little more physically active. Maybe if I can't do it in the office, I could work out before, on my lunch hour, after work. Anxiety would probably settle down. The more physically active you are and the less physical pains and aches that you have. Maybe some of the stress is real. Maybe some of it's, less real or less a necessary part of the environment that you live in. Might be your responses to things. Your stress response might be, your baseline might be high, so maybe it can be reduced by a little bit. Maybe you'll start sleeping better. Maybe when you sleep better, your body regenerates a little bit better. You can regenerate cartilage.
Are
you
you
can
trying
strengthen
to
tendons. You can, some of these pains might go away. The inflammation might come down. So this is a big. You talk about an economy. You talk about a government, a body politic. There are so many thousands, millions even of influences on a daily basis, weekly, monthly, yearly. So many factors take into account. The sheer chutzpah, the arrogance of people who believe they can control these things, or they can force people to make choices, or to make these choices or those, to make this moral choice or that. When in reality, the government propagates its own necessity. Because the government breaks your arm, it then has to cast it and show you what good doctors they are. Because the government causes the prices of everything to inflate by printing money and making the money they print worth that much less, and the money that's already in circulation, the government creates problems like inflation. Well, now they have to have welfare programs to give people a certain basic income so that at least they can buy those things that, because of the government itself, have become more expensive and further out of reach.
What about healthcare? That's a huge topic. It's like 20% of the federal government's budget. I could be wrong about that.
Industry.
20?
Every single industry suffers from all of the same problems and stands to benefit from all of the same solutions. So why is healthcare so expensive in this country? Well, you have the general comorbid condition of inflation, which makes everything expensive. The price of gas doesn't have to go up, but it does because we print a lot of money and because we restrict the
I remember
the
reading once, shouldn't the price of gas, for example, be constantly going down because the technology is getting better?
Yes,
and because
it's only because we restrict the output. We refuse to drill for it. We refuse to frack.
And environmentalists.
And again, there might be validity to some of the concerns, but those always have to be weighed. If we're poisoning the water and causing people to get sick or causing animals to die, I mean, we eat what comes out of the ocean too. So there are for sure concerns there.
So healthcare.
And there's actually a very important argument to be made within libertarianism. And a lot of people don't appreciate this. Rand Paul, for example, is definitely not in favor of any individual or corporation or government, for that matter. Governments pollute quite a bit. He's not in favor of anybody polluting the air or the water in such a way that it harms the quality of life of other people. That's stealing my liberty. Now, clean air is a right, clean water, I don't know, but the idea that...
you don't know if clean water is a right?
It's not that it's not a right. It's, the extent to which you'd like to dictate the behavior of every human being in the economy. What's clean water? People used to use rivers as latrines. So within certain limits, maybe the water would dilute some of the waste that's poured into it. Naturally speaking, you have things like wildfires, volcanic ash. I mean, entire society has been wiped out by these things. So, barbecuing in my backyard. Am I throwing off pollutants? I mean, potentially, depending on who you ask. I actually really like the smell of barbecue, and I think burning wood is probably the cleanest and most natural way to cook anything. It adds flavor. There might be more energy efficient ways of cooking. The question is the degree to which you'd like to put a loaded gun to the head of anybody who wants to cook a chicken wing or a brisket.
Have like a limit on how much you could grill per house per day.
I believe the state of California, as far as I can tell, I believe it's probably already illegal
it's always California.
To cook over hardwood. So
we're saying healthcare. We're saying healthcare.
But going back to healthcare as an example, everything is more expensive because of inflation. Specifically to healthcare, on top of wages or minimum wages, on top of the cost of fuel, because obviously everything that they get is delivered by a truck or in a car or a van or a train or a plane, etc. On top of that, you have things like malpractice insurance. I had an uncle of blessed memory. My Uncle Rob was one of the higher-ranking doctors of the OBGYN department in Hackensack Medical Center, the biggest hospital in New Jersey. Worked there for 40 years. He told me that before he retired early because he was done with it. He was done with the malpractice insurance. He was paying something like $250,000 a year in malpractice insurance. Because every woman who delivered a baby that had special needs or some genetic defect or some birth defect
could sue
automatically, without question, without reason, without logic, without rationale, sues him, the hospital, the practice, everyone you can shoot a lawsuit at.
Right.
They just shake them all down. And the insurance companies were under pressure to pay these lawsuits out or to settle if it was more cost effective for them. But that was a business decision. You always have attorneys who, somewhat secretively, are always lobbying for more of these ambulance chase, slip and fall type lawsuits. You know, if you have a child who's born with a birth defect, you hear ads for this on the radio. Call such and such law firm and we'll help you go find the doctor who should have known that your child has. I was supposed to know. You want all these tests to be standard? Guess what? That drives up the cost of healthcare.
Right.
When everybody get mandatory COVID tests, that drives up the cost of healthcare.
Well, someone has to pay
all the
for
equipment,
it.
And again, these
and
are
the government
that
is
need
not
to
a
be made, but they need to be negotiated
actor, right?
in a free market.
Yeah, so they wouldn't be able to
So
get
they have their standards
fair.
of hygiene that costs money, which is great. You want to be hygienic. Maybe there are certain limits. Maybe something's within reason or not. But these things have to be decided by a free market and an economy. I'm not a doctor.
Well, there's also
So the
universal insurance. I would say is probably the biggest driving.
Well, here's the thing
or
with
close.
insurance.
Right.
Depending on the insurance laws and depending on the economy in which an insurance company operates, one of the problems with insurance, especially socialized medicine, is that it puts zero, and I mean basically zero, of the burden of responsibility for your own healthcare outcome on you, the individual.
Right.
That means that you could smoke, you could drink, you could take drugs, you could prostitute yourself, you could do whatever you want. And all of society has to
or
pay
just
for
live a
it.
9-to-5 sedentary lifestyle over 40, 50 years.
You can eat terribly, non-nutritious, anti-nutritious things. You can basically do whatever you want, sleep if you want or not. And all of society pays the price. So the beauty of the free market is that you can have anything you want as long as you can pay for it. And you can work as hard as you can or wish to, or as many jobs as you want or have or can get, in order to afford those things that you prioritize. In the case of healthcare, people die. It's a thing. It's been going on for a while.
Yeah, won't go anywhere anytime soon.
How much does society need to spend, for example, on resveratrol, I believe is the name of this compound found in red wine that David Sinclair talks a lot about. Could we, in theory, extend your average human life by, let's say, 6 to 12 months? I mean, it would cost us a megaton of money to do, but is that a collective societal demand, expectation, requirement? I don't know. Individuals would like to purchase it. Maybe they can. If it's exorbitantly expensive, whoever wants to should be free to. Whoever can't or doesn't want to, I mean, it is what it is. Socialism disperses and diffuses the responsibility for everything on everyone. So if I abuse my body, the socialist system has to pay for my surgery, or has to pay for my therapy, or has to pay for my treatment.
What if there's people that'll say that that's actually more fair, because that way the people that need the most help, there's a line for that, right? That to each to their need, to each to their ability. I probably butchered that.
I believe that was attributed to JFK, if I'm not mistaken. We can look that up.
I think it was Stalin, wasn't it? I think it was like a communist line.
From each according to their ability, each according to their need.
So, but the idea is that, maybe the people that need the most help are the people that also aren't able to help themselves the most, and the people that have the most resources.
So now you're asking a question about the economics of charity.
Yes.
Is there virtue in forced charity? Can you force me? Can you take half of my income and distribute it to people that you'd like to give it to? I mean, are those people necessarily the most deserving? Or are they just gaming the system? Are those people the people that I might be helping if I were doing it freely and voluntarily? What are my obligations to help people? Should I be helping people in my family before the money goes to some other community? Should I be helping my community before it goes to a further community? This is a great question, the economics of charity. We definitely need to talk about this on another occasion.
Yeah,
charity precedes government. Charity pre-existed.
True, right. Caveman days,
All of these people have been charitable for thousands of years. There's been cruelty too.
Right.
But at the end of the day, charity wasn't invented by the government. Socialism didn't invent charity. People can and will help. As a matter of fact, the more disposable income people have, the more they tend to give.
Right.
That's economic fact.
I think it's measured.
That is statistically measured and proven. Also, people with conservative political views and people who are of religious leanings give more than people who aren't. So there are a lot of people who claim, the wealthy don't give enough. The wealthy actually give more. They pay a disproportionately large percentage, let alone the flat number. They pay a disproportionately larger percentage in higher tax brackets than anyone else. It's the top 5% of earners account for something like 50% of the
it's crazy.
The tax revenue in the country, whatever it is. I don't have the exact number in front of me. But the very idea that just because I need something, I'm entitled to it, is a fundamental flaw. And at the same time, the notion that if I need something, there's no other way to get it but the government, equally as poisonous to the mind, the heart, and the soul. That causes people to atrophy on both sides. If I can take drugs because someone else is going to pay for it, I'm not really confronted with the consequences of my life choices or my actions. I'm artificially insured against a lot of the otherwise negative fallout that might help me bottom out faster and come to better conclusions. You hope it happens, it may not. At the same time, the idea that the government is taking care of this is why I don't want to give.
Because
there's a homeless guy in my neighborhood or on my stoop or the subway station or whatever. Well, it's not my problem. It really isn't my problem. There probably is a homeless shelter that probably should be taking that person in. They might have been rejected from the homeless shelter for drugs or prostitution. Or other
what
things.
If the homeless shelter doesn't have
those places.
Federal funding and therefore can't afford?
If we live in a society that's here in America, it's been socialist for years, for decades. We live in a socialist society.
That's a whole other podcast.
Well,
America's been socialist for decades.
Socialist since the war. But
FDR, I think, was the official. Okay, another time.
The New Deal. So if we live in a society that's socialist and socialized by law, by governmental fiat, all these problems are all magically taken care of.
Right.
The government should be doing this.
So you're saying we set like the baseline
First of all, you're taking the income of the people who otherwise may be able to help. And of course, people are drawn to different charities or different charitable causes. Some might want to donate to study, academic, university type things. Some might want to donate directly to science and research and advancement. Some might want to donate to the arts, the humanities, some patrons of the arts. How do you think these famous Michelangelo, Leonardo, how do you think they lived their lives? Mozart, Beethoven, they all had patrons. People who pay some of the best art in pretty objective, universally acknowledged terms. Some of the best of classical art and music was produced in a perfectly free market system.
Right.
Where you found someone who thought you were worth supporting, and you got supported. People paid stipends, in the Jewish community too. People paid stipends to people who showed promise.
Right.
This is an up-and-coming rabbi.
Basically.
It is an investment.
Yeah.
And you have merit for doing such a thing. So it's often forgotten that we had, even before government education, you had phenomenal works of art.
Shout out Napoleon.
Shout out to Napoleon for public schooling friends. We had, and a lot of equality too. Treating citizens equally. That was what basically made him popular. They were done with the aristocrats. Now was the time to treat people equally. Liberty, fraternity, equality was the promise of the revolution. It wasn't exactly delivered upon. It was, but and then the French Revolution subsequent to the American one.
Right.
1789 is supposed
to be 1776. A lot of them. By the way, also Argentina's
France, by the way, which helped America with our revolution. If we're being
fair.
I believe
Argentina's revolutions, I think, were in early 1800s. So it was after the American revolutions.
So
I don't know if they were inspired by it, but
the French were inspired by the American Revolution.
Right.
Liberty, fraternity, equality. Holy smokes, what a promise. We need some of this too. And they brought it to mainland Europe. And then from there, a lot of countries pretended or made efforts, but it only went so far. Getting back to charity. People need to experience need. It makes the individuals motivated to do what they can. It makes the people around them motivated to do what those people can't. You see a single mother or a widow or orphan struggling, just this week's Torah portion, Parashat Mishpatim. You have an obligation to help people out. It's a moral obligation. It's an expectation of you. It's not that it's your money in my pocket. It's my money. It's my hard-earned money. That's why I get credit for giving it. Because I could have done a million other things with it.
You're saying the virtue comes from the fact that you voluntarily gave it over as opposed to...
Now we're back to liberty and to free will and free choice. There's virtue in it because you didn't force me to give it. I chose to.
Right.
There's a whole market for that too, because why would I choose to give to one case of need over another?
Right.
Maybe there are two needy people in my neighborhood, but one of them's a little bit of a jerk. One of them is much more thankful and gracious about it. Hey, it is what it is. Some people are a little bit easier to give to than others. Maybe the free market would actually encourage people who are in need of help, but not terribly appealing to the people around them, try to get help. Now, if they're mentally ill, you have people who feel differently about causes like that and might be more inclined to donate to that too. A lot of mental hospitals get a lot of donations from people who had mentally ill parents, ancestors, children, siblings, etc. So the free market is always infinitely more efficient and more effective than anyone doing anything by force could be. The very fact that you have to apply force to get something done and then employ an entire bureaucurocracy
to enforce
to collect and distribute, and then you're assuming there's no corruption, there's no theft, there's no misappropriation, there's no influence peddling. Who gets to sponsor all of these? Who gets to supply all these offices, the government agencies? Where do they get their Post-it notes? Where do they get their pens? Who makes the uniforms? Who makes the guns, the bullets, the grenades?
The chairs,
Everything's got some kind of crooked, shady deal going on in some place or another. That's just the way people are. They're always looking for their own interests. At least the free market is honest about it. The point there, though, is that, let's say get back to healthcare, for example. Let's begin with the fact that every single individual of capable mind is responsible for their body. It sounds so basic it shouldn't need to be said, but I'm going to say it again. Every single human being is responsible for their own health and welfare. Obviously, there are people who are born into wealth and those born into poverty. I didn't make that decision, but that's how some people are born. Some are born in situations of health. Some are born handicapped. And we have an obligation to help people to the best of our ability. There are obviously countries that, economically speaking, are doing better than others. Some cases, like America, most of Western Europe, and much of Japan, you have a lot of depression. I mean, maybe fiscal wealth, but a lot of depression, anxiety, mental health disorders. So it's not so clear-cut that poorer countries are, across the board, worse off than we are. It could be that Africa's a happier continent than America. I'd believe it.
No, that depends.
They have different
where,
struggles.
I feel like,
different struggles, but their communities are different, and then they're built differently, and their responsibilities towards their neighbors are very different. So the case, first of all, must be made. The foundation of liberty is that you're responsible for your own life, welfare, income, your ability to provide for yourself, your own provisions. There's a famous I believe it was Benjamin Franklin quote, that the Constitution only promises you the freedom to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. The pursuit is up to you.
Ha! That's a good quote.
That's not a constitutional promise that everyone's going to be happy. No one can promise such a thing.
Right.
It's a constitutional promise that no one should stand in the way of you pursuing your religion or what makes you happy, as long as it doesn't hurt other people or infringe upon their rights.
Right.
That's fair. Off to the races. As long as you're working in something, moral and decent, go ahead and do it. As long as you have a belief that doesn't require me to believe anything, do whatever you want. So, healthcare-wise, I'm responsible for my own health. It begins there. The choices I make, how much I sleep, how regularly, assuming, again, no disorders, but even if there are, that becomes your responsibility to address. How much I eat, what I eat, when I eat, how much I eat in one sitting, how frequently I have bouts of, intake of food, what I choose to drink, how often, if I choose to delve into, the occasional social drink, or if I want to smoke cigars, cigarettes, or pipes, I'm free to do it. But you do have to bear the responsibility for the outcome.
Right.
You don't get to smoke yourself into cancer and then point at me and say, I'm your problem now. I may be able to help you. I might be inclined to help you. It all comes back to the individual responsibility. You're responsible for what you eat, how you eat, when you eat. You're responsible for how much you sleep, how much you recover. You're responsible to be responsible for your health, for your lifestyle, for your decisions. Do some people have to work more than others? Some jobs more demanding than others? It all has to be figured out by the individuals in question. You don't like your job? Well, you're free to take on another job or a different job, to negotiate better wages, to re-educate yourself, to go get trained, to volunteer somewhere and see if you like it. There's many ways to do this. But your health care depends primarily upon you.
Right.
It's your responsibility. These are choices you have to make. Can care be made available? Absolutely. My older brother's father-in-law, I'm not going to say that he died penniless, but he left very little by way of inheritance, much to the surprise of his heirs, his widow and his 4 kids, because he gave away so much of the family's wealth. He was a doctor, in the form of immunizations, treatments, inoculations, stitches.
You're saying it in like a charity sense?
Charity.
Okay.
To low-income families. That's what he did. Lived in Brooklyn. He was in Flatbush. He performed so many procedures
And he
gave
paid
away
for
so
them
many
himself.
medications. He paid out of pocket because he knew people couldn't pay for it. He didn't want their kids to suffer, and he just did what he could. And that's in spite of having, many places having Medicare, Medicaid,
right.
etc. These programs are old. So the burden for your own welfare and for your own health has to reside with you.
Mm-hmm.
Other people can't help, and they'd probably be more inclined to help the more they see you helping yourself.
Yeah, that's true.
Any role society, let alone government, could play in healthcare should be directed at making it as affordable as possible.
How would that happen? Isn't that what they're
Here
trying
are
to
some
do?
great examples. Well, the costs of entry into healthcare
Mm-hmm.
are exorbitantly expensive medical
I see what
school.
you're saying. Right.
But just like the Constitution lays out, there should be no impediment to free commerce.
Mm-hmm.
The government's only role, the federal government, should be to prevent impediments from commerce or from interstate commerce. And in that specific example, what can we do to lower the cost of healthcare?
Right.
A lot of the requirements for construction, the requirements for sanitation, the requirements for gear, requirements for training.
Mm-hmm.
Who's authorized to do things like stitches, to give shots?
Well, I mean, the argument is that they're doing that because you don't want do it in some guy's basement with
Understood.
under sanitized.
Maybe.
polluted.
First of all, maybe there's some kind of a middle ground.
Okay.
Urgent care is a great example.
Mm.
A lot of what's done today in urgent care, City MD, Whole Family, whatever, there's a ton of them.
Mm-hmm.
They actually have a really profitable model because they're doing everything you can do outside of a hospital.
Interesting.
With the massive overhead of a hospital and all
Right.
the inspections and all the construction requirements and performance requirements and all the paperwork and all the inspections that need to go on.
So you're saying more in that direction?
It's a much more free market solution.
Right.
There's so much you can do outside of a hospital. And if you go and they tell you you have to go in for surgery, they don't do surgery there.
Right.
They do stitches.
Okay.
They give you shots. They'll deal with allergies.
Right.
They can help you. They'll do x-rays, tell you if you broke a bone. I've been there. So they can prescribe antibiotics. They can help you. They can take cultures and send to labs. Anything you can do outside of a hospital is going to be significantly less expensive to everybody.
Right. Makes sense.
So for sure, whatever you can do. Now, maybe there's something to be said for deregulating in other ways too, because the regulations are what cause the expense.
Right.
Maybe some people don't want to go to a dentist who charges $300 per cavity, and maybe there's, I don't know. I'm not going to suggest specific solutions, but they exist if you're creative enough and if you're thinking along those lines. That's one of many, many examples. We will touch on many of these topics.
We'll get some more.
And
we
many
have
other
to wrap
aspects
it up.
of the economy
So,
and other aspects of the human soul, the human condition, because at the end of the day, I believe these things to be all related and connected.
Right.
They're not as disjointed as people believe they are.
So if you had to wrap it up with one last thought of what you'd like to see more of on an individual level, on a global level, national level, what direction should we be heading in? What should we see more of and less of?
Is it a prediction or a prescription? What we need
a little bit of both.
What we need more of? Freedom.
Okay.
Freedom to think, freedom to come up with solutions, freedom to compete for the implementation of those solutions, competition of ideas, competition of performance. We need more freedom of thought. We need more responsibility, first and foremost for ourselves, and then in concentric circles, for our families, communities,
right.
neighbors, friends. The less we trust government to solve any problems, because they never do, they certainly create more than they solve anyway, the less we rely on government, the more we can go back to helping each other and helping ourselves.
Independently,
by way of free will, because we want people to be well. Your average person wants good and wants to do good.
Right.
People will learn from the example of those who do, and society would encourage them to do more of the same. Podcast. Showcase people who do good things, people who solved problems. I don't care about the government or any of these crazy agencies or bureaucracies. Show me people.
We should touch on the next episode, the election.
All day long, show me people who helped a neighbor, who helped a friend, who donated, who gave, who paid somebody's tab, who saw a single mother at Walmart and dropped a credit card. All day long. People solve problems. Government only create them.
So more individual responsibility.
More individual initiative, more individual responsibility.
And freedom.
More people taking chances on helping other people, giving people a shot, giving people a chance, doing all those things government has always promised and never delivered on.
All right.
We'll make the world a better place one person at a time. We will definitely not get anywhere trusting the government and the corrupt agents of government to do things that they always promise and never deliver on, and they come back the next cycle. It's his fault, it's her fault, it's that party, it's this party. Got us nowhere. So yes, my blessings and well wishes to Javier Milei, and very, very hopeful for that example. I would love to see reality play itself out. Give liberty a chance. It will redeem all of us.
Amen. All right. Thank you guys for watching. We'll be back.